Welcome to Games and Feelings, an advice show about playing games, being human, and dealing with the fact that those games will involve other humans. I am your host and question keeper, Eric Silver, and if you added me to your RPG party, you would be 25% less likely to ruin food cooked at your camp, because I bring hot sauce with me, and I'll convince all the other people in the party that it was actually good. Historian Claire Aubin, what passive bonus would you bring to an RPG party?
I think clothing and items would never need repairs.
Oh,
nice.
Because
I'm very into like sewing and making stuff. I'm like a tinkerer. I like to build stuff. I'm a big embroiderer, things like that. So like, I think I would be very good on the sort of upkeep. Nothing would ever degrade.
I like that a lot. I like the idea of there being like one cutscene that plays every time this happens, and it's like it's always you. It's like, look what I've made, and you're holding nothing in your hands, and then like the pop-up comes up and it's like, Claire brought you a little duck made out of fuzz.
100% yes. My sister is a big TTRPG player, and she always says that like the gnome race was like made for me.
Oh,
like
yeah,
that is
little
like
tinkerer.
That is what I am, a little tinkerer, dastardly, feisty little thing.
In the Gashapon RPG, where you have to spend $1,000 to get the good classes, be like, yeah, I think Claire's pretty good, but it's really annoying when she keeps bringing me little ducks. It's not worth it. It takes 5 more seconds for me to click through it. I just don't think it's worth it for her buffs.
Can we skip the cutscene every time she's making things?
On Polygon, there's a guide that says, just hold down plus on your Nintendo Switch every time Claire brings you something.
But they'll have the noises, like, you know, in like Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, and there's like the cooking noises. They're like ding, 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 ding. That's what's happening.
Now, if you hold down plus for too long, the sound will continue to play because your Switch is confused. Then you will need to restart.
Yes.
Claire, I'm so happy to have you on here, if only to prove that you can meet friends in 2023 on Twitter. It's 100% possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And anyone who says otherwise has a bad personality, and that's the problem. That they have a personality that they can't telegraph into the online world.
You just seem to be more and more earnest as like Twitter is becoming worse and worse in 2023. You're just like, I like these specific things. If you have a podcast, have me on. Please.
Yeah, pretty much. I was like, look, I could become the kind of person who doesn't use exclamation points, but then people would think I'm the kind of person who doesn't use exclamation points. And then when they do meet me, I'm not going to be the person they expected at all. So I might as well just be fully myself online, and we'll just see how it goes.
Yeah, that's what writing is for. AI is taking our jobs, but really it's about communicating your truest self on socials to find each other.
100%.
And I think that that's worth it because, you know, we're being very goofy right now. But Claire, what are you a historian of? Just so everyone knows what we're talking about today.
The Holocaust.
Woo, let's go.
Yeah. So, I mean, personality-wise, sometimes it doesn't people would not necessarily expect that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I am a historian of Holocaust perpetration, and specifically Holocaust perpetrators and like methods and things like that. Nazis who moved to the US, or Holocaust perpetrators who moved to the US in the post-war period, as well as just like general Nazis, neo-Nazis, far right, all that kind of stuff in the US.
Incredible.
So
we need you because I don't know if you heard, but they're back.
I mean,
they're back in a big way. It's a reboot.
My Twitter very much suggests that as being the case. I was on the Spirits podcast very recently, and I said my DMs are open, and I had to close them that afternoon.
Of course.
because of Nazis, which sounds wild to say, but like, and especially if you are someone who studies them, it's just a constant, like you're always on the brink of some insane person popping into your DMs or showing up or whatever. Sure. So they're back with a vengeance, I would say.
Just a full remake, like Link's Awakening. they have a different art style, but it's truly exactly the same. But, this is the vibe. I think this is the vibe that we're looking for on all of the multitude podcasts, but even here on Games and Feelings. We're going to talk about something that's hard and complicated with lots of jokes and being really stupid about it as much as we can. Lots of information, stupid vibes. That is how we're going to attack it.
That makes a nice change from sort of a lot of the places that I talk about my research, which are like very stiff, very rigid, academic, conferences and things where there's not really any room for like, can we just take a breath and like take in what we're talking about without it creating this enormous weight at all times?
Absolutely. Well, I would love to have some conversations with you about adding like xenophobes and ethnocentrists into your tabletop RPG game, because you're here because you love games and Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop RPGs. Yes.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Absolutely. You weren't going to deliver World War II. You weren't just going to deliver World War II lectures at us. This was about games too.
Yes. There was a point here.
Yeah. So every time I want to introduce a group of bad guys who think one group of people is best, because, we're dealing with science fiction, we're dealing with fantasy. It's always metaphor, right? Like, and the scale of metaphor can go anywhere from barely disguised, like in Star Wars, to something all the way on the other side of the spectrum, where you create all these different types of groups of people, and that group of people gets put off in one corner, and there's another group of people who are in power who like doing that. The point is, every time I do it, I feel weird and bad, because it's like, wow, I just had to make up a slur, a fantasy slur, in this world that I created. And I am the kind of person, as a Jew, and I've been a Jew my entire life, who like, I want to include this because they are the bad guys, right? In my head, truly. As obviously as Indiana Jones, or again, as in this metaphorical version of it. But it always just feels super clunky. Do you have any sort of thought from someone who studies this all the time of like, should we include Nazi adjacent things in our tabletop RPG games? And is there a way to do it that would feel satisfying instead of weird and bad?
Yeah, I mean, there are games like there's a modification or a modified version of Call of Cthulhu called Achtung Cthulhu, which is like literally you're fighting Nazis in it.
Sure.
Like there are games where they've like incorporated this mechanic, like really in an on the nose way. But I think despite the clunkiness that you're talking about, I think being extremely obvious about it is probably the best way to go about it, because the issue sometimes comes with these depictions that are meant to be nuanced but end up feeling confusing, or end up feeling like you're looking for almost like redemption in this group that are like obviously biased against someone else and are obviously like trying to do a genocide or something against another group.
Trying to do a genocide, yeah.
Like, because that's the thing is a lot of times these start out as like, we don't like those guys. Like I'm thinking of, obviously this isn't a tabletop RPG, but like Skyrim or something, where you're like, it starts off with like, there's some animus here, but we'll see. And then as it gets further in, you're like, oh no.
Right. It's like neither the Stormcloaks nor the Imperials are good. They both are weird ethnocentrists in their own way. Right.
Yes, exactly. You're like, there's no option in that really, unless you completely avoid that sort of quest line or storyline. There's no way to avoid joining like an ethnocentric semi-fascist state. Like you can't do it. And that to me is a problem. A situation where you can't opt out of joining or participating in something, or where players don't have the ability to say, oh, actually, I don't really like this storyline and I don't really want to engage in this. Like that to me is an issue. If your RPG hinges on the fact that they have to somehow help, even if it's like, oh, this is a side quest where you help them and then later that turns into some bigger thing. Even if it's that, if the goal is that you're going to force your players into a position where they have to help a group that maybe wants to do a genocide or has these like really sort of
every time you say it, it's just funny. It's like, yeah, that's what their ultimate goal is. That's what they like. It's funny every time.
I mean, and that's the thing is like that pretty much is, in my experience at least, that pretty much does end up being whatever group it is, their goal is that.
Right.
Or even if it's not like genocide in terms of like we were going to kill everyone, but this sort of like cultural genocide or cultural oppression even, or they want to enforce some hierarchy or whatever, or like, enslave a group or etc. Like anything along those lines, like I feel like there are some things as a player or a DM or whatever, some games you're kind of, no matter what you do, you will kind of end up sort of shunted into a certain storyline, quest line, whatever, because you have to do it in order to get to the big bad or whatever it is.
Right.
However, I think with storylines like this that are a little bit more delicate, if your players, particularly if you have players that come from backgrounds where they might have experienced oppression or been marginalized or put in a position where they're like made to feel more vulnerable in society or whatever it is, if you then go, hey, your escapist fantasy game that you play, we're going to do it again. We're going to make you do that. And you have to fight your way out of it now is like a little bit like, okay, I get it. Yeah. But, I think being obvious is actually more helpful in that case rather than leaning on the like really complex, nuanced things that are like, well, is the Nazi bad?
Right. Exactly. Right. Do not make nuanced enemies out of this particular group. No, I think everything you're saying explains my trepidation with figuring it out. Is like, even if I want to achieve the power fantasy of punching this in the face, right? Every time it's like, well, now I'm going to have to role play some hate speech. And I don't want that. It's just not worth it. The squeeze is never going to be worth the juice of putting yourself as the person running the game and your players through you having to act this out and participate in the scene. Like I just, every time I just don't feel like it gets there.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the thing is like, it can be bad it can be good in some ways, which we'll talk about in a second, but like it can be bad in a lot of ways, which is like, it could be not fun for the player. Also for the DM who has to be like, now I'm going to be a raging racist for the next however long. Like that's also not
it's a fantasy racist. I don't like merfolk. It's different.
Yeah, it's different. I only have to embody or I only have to imagine the brain of a racist and be that person for the next 3 to 5 hours,
right. It's all bad.
That's not good for anyone. That being said, getting to, punch the Nazi in the face, the anti-merfolk Nazi or whatever he is, getting to punch that guy in the face, like, yeah, that is the upside for sure. In some ways having power or having the ability to take back power in that way can also be really empowering for players and for the DMs. You're like, yeah, I'm being horrible and evil, but I really want you to kick my ass. It's like that's also good. Like, so, I mean, I think it's not as black and white as like it's good or bad. It's just about how it's built into the game.
Yes. I mean, I've definitely said before, is like, if you're going to put a Nazi in my game, I better punch them very soon, very fast. I said it, and then Brendan Lee Mulligan said it again on my, like, he has said the thing I said in his mouth, and I was like, that's cool. It's cool that you quoted me in this particular thing.
So Eric Silver is the GM for Join the Party. And he has talked a lot about, like as a Jewish man, game master, he's been like, basically said jokingly, but truthfully, he's like, listen, the only way I'll put Nazis in a game is if the point is to kill Nazis, right? Or punch Nazis. And the attitude there, I think, is a very real one that has to do with, there's 2 ways to escape. You can escape to the world that doesn't have the problem, or you can escape to the world where you can solve the problem with magic and swords.
Yeah, let's talk about the power fantasy for a second. I know this is steering a little bit away from this. As someone who knows too much about like the bad group of people that exist, what are ways we can get at like I guess, leftist power fantasies instead. I think, you've seen that meme that exists, the woman for the BuzzFeed video who says, "This is why I hate video games. It appeals to the male fantasy." And then that macro exists, so that it's always something totally different. Like, what are some leftist power fantasies that can exist that instead of having to like build up like racists or people who are going to say slurs at us, what are other ways we can explore this?
I have a great answer for this, actually.
Please.
So I just moved back to the US, and before
I'm so sorry. Oops. Whoops.
I know,
Oops.
it's hard. But I was living in the UK, and I was part of sort of a long-term D&D party, and we played it through a bunch of different campaigns. And the last campaign that we played before I moved here was Curse of Strahd.
Yeah.
And we played Strahd, and my DM is amazing. I'm like still like bereft to not be a part of that group anymore. But the group was 3 of us were women who were the players, and then 2 men, and then our DM. And he made Strahd full incel, like not in like the way that it's kind of implied in the guide for it,
Sure.
but like he went really in on Strahd as an incel, and you should hate him. You should hate him and hear all of the things that he does. And it wasn't making him reenact all this sort of like hate speech or anything. It was just like, oh, and then Strahd did this, and this is what happened to cause this. And all this hatred is based on, having his wife stolen from him, who
Sure.
actually had all this other, like, it was just everything about it was like, I hate this guy. I hate him. And getting to repeatedly kick his ass was great. And it was like not something that had this like obvious subjugation of anyone built into it. It just was like, there was such a clear analogy between people that exist now here and this one guy who was the big bad, that we were like, everyone was so all in for like beating him that it was just, that was like, to me, a perfect sort of like leftist power fantasy, especially to allow 3 women players who have kind of experienced this kind of behavior in their lives to really, it was like a little gift he gave us, that he was like, now go ruin this guy's life.
No, I like
it
that.
Was so good.
That's kind of funny. That's almost like modern retellings of Shakespeare. How it's like, what, this is I love this. This is really prescient. I've talked to Amanda a lot about this, how I want there to be a Macbeth that is staged. It's gender swapped, and it's set in like the 2010s girl boss era, where Lady Macbeth and Macbeth are swapped, and it's like it's Macbeth and Mr. Macbeth, and that's Lady Macbeth. And then he's trying to like push, the man is trying to push the girl boss Macbeth to be in power, so that he, Mr. Macbeth, as the Lady Macbeth, can be a party to that power. Yeah, no, I like, that's the thing that I could not wrap my head around, is needing to create it. And I think that playing Strahd like that, one of the most established bosses from the in-book Dungeons and Dragons canon, then you mess with something that exists. You don't have to create the thing or the premise. You just put on a recognizable skin on that. That's very interesting.
There's a template there that you can say, we already know what this guy's sort of worst traits are. And you just say, what if we just dial it up a little bit? Yeah. And then you say, what if you dial it up and put that into the machine, what comes out? And you're like, oh, it's an incel. Like that's what it is. If you take Strahd and you turn all of his little quirks up and you put it up to a microphone, incel tweets come out, basically. and it was great. And I mean, we also played that campaign starting at level 10. So
so you were very
at
powerful,
yeah. So we got to like really, really mess him up. And we had to fight him repeatedly throughout it, because it was like, it was a sort of mix of a sort of canon regular guide for it, and then also his sort of homebrew story, because he just wanted us to get to keep fighting him over and over again, which was great. It was so fun, and we just got better and better each time. It was amazing.
Right. That's another thing, is like, make sure that you are constantly beating them up. So it's like, oh no, you got to hold yourself back, because we're trying to escape that. You need to be able to use your lightning magic as quickly as possible. I like that a lot. That's interesting.
We also had the mechanic of when we lost, because the idea was that we would regularly lose against him too. Okay. When we lost, we didn't die, even if it would have been a TPK.
Sure.
We would just wake up again in his forest, but de-leveled by a level.
Ooh, that's cool.
Which was a really great mechanic because you didn't feel like, no, the incel ruined our party. It was like, I'm going to get him again.
I'm going to get back. I'm going to go kill some bats for a while, get my level back, and then go do it. No,
it was like, that
awesome.
bastard took my invisibility. Like that's all it was. It was great.
Yeah. I know that you talked about this on Spirits, and I hope this will come out at the same time. But, the Nazis were known for being really weird dudes, especially in relationship to the occult and the arcane. How much of that was true? Or I guess, a lot of those were stories, obviously. We don't know about how much were the weirdness and about just let's shove all the things that 1940s America didn't like and put it on the bad people, for sure. Mm-hmm. But when you end up creating your bad guy, from what you know, from your study, how do we make sure that we're not putting all of our terrible problems on this one bad creature?
Oh, that's a really good question. And I don't know if there's a really good answer to it. Do you mean in the sense of how do you make sure that you're not making the Nazis responsible for everything, or I
guess my question is, from your study, do you feel like there was a chicken and the egg situation? Which came first, the Nazis or the weird shit? And I think that's when we end up making our big bads. It's all right, well, here's the Lich who also wants only one group of people to be powerful. When we examine these two things, how do we make sure that one doesn't lead the other? I feel like the occult and the ethnocentrists are usually one and the same.
Yeah. In terms of Nazis specifically, the weird shit came first, for sure.
Oh, okay.
The occultist stuff, a lot of the beliefs that the Nazis had about specifically things like race, when it comes to things like the Aryans,
right,
that comes out of an occult belief. And that's the thing that a lot of people don't realize. They think that there was just some Nazi racial pseudoscience that just popped up, and they were we like white people, and here are the people that were counting as not white, regardless of skin color, regardless of whatever, they don't count. In actuality, the idea of Aryans as a group in the first place is part of an occult belief. It comes out of this long established neo-pagan belief in what the Aryans were and who the new Aryans were.
Man, the Nords were, Skyrim just ripped that stuff, huh? Jesus Christ.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yes.
Todd Howard, fix your glitches and fix the Nords. Okay, continue. So I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it was playing Skyrim. I replayed it 2 years ago and was geez, wow, they really did not even deviate from this path at all.
Right. That's just what I'm worried is with the part of, just to fill out the question a little bit, with Starfield coming out, it's all right, there's going to be a weird guy who loves weird magic, and then they're going to think one group of people is the most powerful. I just feel like it ends up going hand in hand, and it doesn't need to. I feel like that's where it ends up getting muddled, and then you end up having hey, I'm really liking beating up this Lich, but why are you bringing this other thing into it, which it just feels like we're throwing all of our ills at this big bad. We're assigning every single ill to it, when you end up just having making someone feel uncomfortable while you're no, you're beating up the bad guy. No, you're doing it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think also the Nazis and the occult are kind of a weird example because there are a lot of things that they actually did that were really strange and based on occult beliefs, but a lot of things that they did not do and that we have modern culture has just decided was based on that, right. We don't even talk about the actual weird stuff that they did as often as we should. They were trying to rebreed extinct animals was a big thing because they wanted to bring back specifically 2 extinct animals because they wanted to return the forests of Germany and Poland to their natural prehistoric state. That was a real thing that they were doing. And we went with, they're making Frankenstein's monster. That was right. What everyone, or we're they're making a super shark, or we think that Nazis were trying to raise zombies. No, but what they were doing was trying to bring friggin' dinosaurs back, basically. That's crazy.
That's wild. Yeah. It's the American consciousness can't handle the true thing. So instead we're doing something that seems a little bit more tame, but is wrong.
Yeah, basically. Like it's very okay. For example, it's very obviously morally wrong, I would say, most people would say, to create a zombie army.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I feel like that's a fair conjecture.
Yeah.
Making an undead army is a moral and ethical no-no. However, saying I want to revive a prehistoric ox or a prehistoric horse,
Sure.
maybe more of a gray area. We're like, well, I mean, there's no reason we shouldn't do that necessarily.
Jurassic
But,
Park
like-
hadn't come out yet. That's the problem. It was still 50
You know-
years until 50 years and some talkies first before Jurassic Park would come out.
They were still focused on the could they question, not the stopping to think about whether
Right.
they should. But you know, like that's a real thing that they were doing. And like I also timed this on Spirits, but they did have a group called the Ananerba that was like researching the paranormal. So it's like you can talk about these things without being like, how do we make it the worst, most evil version of this that we
Right.
could possibly imagine?
Yeah. I mean,
know?
we always talk about like when you are looking for inspiration, you get inspired by like other pieces of fiction or history. Just steal it. Just take it. But I feel like you can just take a piece without needing to take everything. He's like, do not
Yeah.
feel like you need to take the weirdness with the ethnocentrist. Don't feel like you need to bring all of it with you.
Yeah, like for example, you could have a campaign where someone's trying to bring back an extinct ox and an extinct horse.
Right.
And they don't have to be like, well, the reason is because I want to go, back to a more idyllic day. You're like, okay, cool. It doesn't have to be an idyllic day where my people ruled, like it does not have to be that the reason that they want that is because they want to engage in subjugation of a race or of a class or whatever. Like there's a way to do that doesn't involve just recreating really harmful, painful social dynamics that exist in the world now outside of your RPG.
Right, exactly.
Or at least I think.
Like you don't need to have a conversation with your players being like, hey, I'm going to bring back some ancient oxes. Is that okay? As opposed to, hey, how do you feel about being called fantasy slurs in your game?
Yeah.
I feel like it's a different thing.
You can be like, I want to bring back a horse, or I want to create a group that's hunting down paranormal objects for dastardly reasons without being like, and the reason is that they want to put your people in a concentration camp.
Right.
Like
Yes, exactly.
There's a whole, there are other ways to go about this, I feel.
Right. Your Session Zero can be a lot different if you just pick and choose. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Hey, it's Eric, and I got whatever Jasper has in the fridge. I'm at Jasper's house and I'm eating his food because on Saturday, August 19th at 7:30 British Summertime, we are doing a live show at the Empty Space in Manchester. Tickets are on sale now. Gamesandfeelings.com/live. I'm bothering Jasper. I have been bothering Jasper for days now. You're going to really enjoy it. Bring your friends. Tell your friends. Please come. We really want to do this. This is my first time in the UK and certainly the first time that I'm performing outside of the country. Me, Amanda, Jasper, special guest. Please go to that. And you can also support the wonderful podcast that we have here through Patreon, patreon.com/gamesandfeelings, just like GeoGrun, who's an annual patron. That is 12 months for the price of 10. It's wonderful. We have plenty of wonderful patrons, just like Polly Burge, Kelsey Duffy, and Peyton, who are all telling their friends about the Games and Feelings live show, especially their British friends and their European friends, because the Europeans are always saying, oh, come here, I live in a country, but I'll go anywhere, I'll take a train, because I have wonderful train service. And they're like, and now they got to prove it, because Kelsey and Polly and Peyton now are proving it. So you got to go. Patreon.com/gamesandfeelings. It is a wonderful day in the neighborhood to listen to a new podcast from the Multitude Podcast Collective. You're going to like Spirits. I was just on Spirits for a fantastic episode, if I do say so myself, where we organized a bracket of monsters that sell you stuff. You got to check this out for all of our thoughts on Gritty, Godzilla, the monster cereals like Boo Berry and Count Chocula, and that Sasquatch that sells you jerky, all of that and more. SpiritsPodcast.com. Listen wherever you get your podcasts. We are sponsored this week by Ravensburger Jigsaw Puzzles. I'm so excited about this because you and I can indulge in the timeless pleasure of assembling Ravensburger extraordinary jigsaw puzzles. Ravensburger's premium quality puzzles are crafted with meticulous attention to detail, bringing you an unparalleled puzzle-solving experience. With a rich heritage dating back to 1883, Ravensburger puzzles have become an integral part of families' lives across generations. Share the joy of puzzling with family and friends, and I certainly do because Amanda is always out here puzzling, knowing that your cherished puzzles will stand the test of time. Enjoy a mindful moment and immerse yourself in a world of captivating colors, stunning imagery, and intricate designs that will delight people of all ages. Regardless of your preference or skill level, you will find a jigsaw puzzle that suits you perfectly, thanks to their wide range of imagery, themes, and puzzle counts available. Start small and work your way up to 40,000 piece puzzies. Are you up for the challenge? Shop Ravensburger at your local game store or on Amazon today. Ravens, like multiple of the corvid, and burger, like the meat patty. You're gonna love it. And now, back to the show. That's actually a good question. Is there any really wild stuff that you figured out, that you've uncovered in your study, that you've brought specifically into tabletop RPG games, or do you really try to keep one away from the other? Well, I had Carlos Maza on in a previous episode of Games and Feelings, and he's like, yeah, I just really love bringing MLMs when I'm DMing and to let people destroy them. I just absolutely love it. It's great. And I was like, all right, so Carlos is bringing that stuff. Do you, when you're digging into things from World War II and the Holocaust, is there any like really wild stuff that you bring with you, or is it a little bit too much?
I don't know if I necessarily bring anything with me into a game. I very rarely DM because I'm a total princess and I like to play.
I'm a player princess. I don't do it.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I DM sometimes, but I don't think I have the focus necessary to like be spending as much time outside of the session.
Sure.
Really thinking about it, like little ideas pop into my head. And more often than not, I'll, text my DM or something and say, hey, I had an idea. Feel free to use it.
But that counts. That 100% counts. Or like your player is based on like a woman who pulled a machine gun out of her refrigerator and like shot down 40 Nazis. Like, I don't know.
You know what? I think probably the area where I bring my studies into anything or into any gaming that I do is that they fill me with a sense of rage that I think gets channeled into the gaming. And so like I end up very often playing either extremely devious, weird old ladies.
Yeah, dude. Yeah.
Or like, it's almost always women. I tend to prefer to play female characters. I think it's an empowering thing, but in Strahd, for example, I play a really, really powerful Aasimar paladin, and it was just so fun because I was fully optimized for the game.
Sure.
Like had all the resistances I could have possibly needed. And so I was just kicking ass the whole time and feeling so empowered and feeling so like, yeah, I can destroy evil things. And it felt really good because the next day I would go and sit and write this dissertation that was just like, at that he went to trial for 30,000 murders. Like, he
had such a good time in Argentina, and then right before he was about to die, he had to go on trial, right?
Yeah, and he was found innocent. Like, or he died before the trial ended. So technically, he died without ever having been convicted.
Right.
And like, that's not. You don't get satisfaction when you write about the people that I write about. There's no satisfaction in it. There's no sense of justice. There's no feeling of like, and the right thing happened. It never, ever feels like that because the people I'm talking about are people who were not caught until they were, 70, 80 years old. They face almost no consequences other than maybe being deported. So there's no sense of satisfaction. And so then when I play games, I am like filled with this, like, I play characters that are like full of righteous anger.
Yes.
And
I mean, it sounds good. That sounds great. Yeah. Yeah. I know that like this power fantasy, I've been thinking about it a lot, and I feel like how it's only used to express like, oh, then you get to be a big guy and a sword, and then two ladies. Like I think about The Witcher 3, right? Wow. Two different types of women, one blonde hair and one brown hair, both think you're nice, and that you can date them at the same time, and maybe they won't find out. Like, you know, a power fantasy can be anything, and that's also something we're trying to express with our. Another thing we do is like we have fun through collaboration, but also through defeating the things in play that we can't defeat in our real life. As I think about like, you know, how capitalism has become the enemy is kind of like the current mode of games right now, both in tabletop RPG media and also in our video games.
Yeah. I would also like to mention that in Witcher 3, I find it very strange that, first of all, that the whole thing is that there are two ladies, they both like you can date them and hope that they don't find out. And also, while that's happening, you can bone as many other women as you want. Mm-hmm. Like, all of a witch, sure. There's one lady, when I was playing it, I never got to like, you know, romance her because I accidentally killed her. And they were like, that's not an important plot point. Anyways, move on. Like, it's like, that's the whole, like, you are living out some ultimate, like, stereotypical gamer guy fantasy, right? Where you're like, I can just do whatever I want. And then I get to choose between Yennefer and Triss. Oh no. Like,
and only if you do a terrible job of convincing them you're not dating the other one, then do they become friends and then dump you, and then nothing else bad happens. You can play the game exactly the same, but you just don't get to talk to two NPCs anymore. Congratulations. That's the worst thing that can happen to you, guy playing The Witcher.
Yeah.
God. And then you can just download an expansion and you'll romance someone else. You're fine. You're fine.
Yeah.
Oh, God. Yes, I know we touched on this a little bit, but yeah, do you do anything else to escape your studies? Do you do anything else when you're playing tabletop RPGs or video games? Is there any other type of game you're attracted to so you don't need to think about what you usually do?
I love all kinds of games, RPGs, video games, whatever, but first of all, there are certain kinds of games I tend to avoid. I am not a first-person shooter person.
That's fair.
It's not for me. I briefly, when I was living in the UK, my partner was living here, and we were briefly playing Call of Duty together because it was like a game that we could play co-op from across the world that wasn't difficult, basically. Right. And there would be several times where I would have to be like, after, you know, 2 sessions, I would be like, I can't, we got to stop this. This is not the game for me to be playing. I just spent all day reading about violence, and now I'm here trying to shoot some guy who's saying mean things to me over the headphones. Why do I want that?
Right. You have to keep chat on because you're talking to your boyfriend. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, like, so there are games that I tend to not play. I don't play a ton of horror games in general.
Yeah.
That being said, every once in a while I'll find a game that's just like that I just feel like I have to play, and it's like almost cathartic to be in such a like weird, scary, whatever game. For example, Hellblade.
Yeah.
That game.
Sorry, Claire was making faces. Claire could not say anything. Claire was dealing with that.
I don't even know how to get across what was happening. I played it on a projector at home in the dark.
Oh my God.
Let me tell you, I was in it. I was Senua. I was terrified. It was horrifying. And I was like, it's also Viking shit, which is like related to the Nazi stuff. And that was a wild game. And it really took me out of all of I could channel the stress of my research into being stressed out about this game instead, which was great. I highly recommend it.
That game in particular is like so, like we're so even past low fantasy that it's just like everything sucks. Everyone poops everywhere. It's scary and everything's bad. Nothing's good. It's like, I don't even know what this is. It's just dark. All right, whatever.
Yeah, they were like, let's have a boss that you have to like scrabble around in the dark, make no noise, and you can find him by listening to water rushing, and you are going to want to cry the whole time. And there's a video, because my friend and I were both playing it at the same time, and she and I were filming ourselves playing it and sending each other particularly videos of us screaming when things happen, and like screenshots. There's one of me holding my controller like directly below my eyeballs to play it, because I would just put my controller up over my eyes whenever something scary happened because I didn't want to see it. That game is great for the sort of like escapist, but in like a kind of not in a comforting way.
Yeah.
In like you cannot think about anything else when you're playing that game. It's so all encompassing. At least I find.
No, I feel you. Like, listen, I'm not ever going to look to a video game to show psychosis properly, but at least like it's not some dumb metaphor for it. They're going to make it feel as harrowing and terrible as possible, and you know what it's going to be. They're very obvious about the whole thing, instead of like, you know, trying to use a madness table straight out of the D&D guide. Like, it is what it is. This is we're putting it out there. It's something totally weird and different. And it's not trying to be metaphorical. This is what we were saying before. It's like, it's not trying to be metaphorical about it. It is. And if you want to play it, do it. And if you don't.
Sure. I think on the other side of this sort of escapism fantasy thing, I also play a lot of these sort of traditional cozy games.
Of course. Like
cozy, cottagecore, whatever things, which I know everyone does, but there are a few that are like really, really close to my heart in terms of things that I find really comforting when my research gets to be way too much.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anyone's talked about this on the podcast before, but like Wander Home.
Oh yeah, Wander Home's great.
Amazing. That game is just like it's like a hug. It feels like drinking warm tea and like a blanket, and it's just so nice. It feels like a Miyazaki movie, but it's that game is really, really good for that.
But instead of like My Neighbor Totoro, it feels like Porco Rossi or like Princess Mononoke, right? It's like it's a cozy game for adults, which I think is worth it. That's why, you look at the horrible, what do? We look at the horrible things in the world and we laugh at it and we make jokes about it, while also like nothing. It doesn't have to be Animal Crossing cutesy all the time, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, even in the sort of traits you can give your characters, there's like traumatized ones that you can give them that aren't playing off some like stereotype or aren't like this thing that sometimes I think particularly newer players of tabletop games will do, where they're like, I'm going to give my character the saddest, most traumatic backstory on the planet. He's an orphan and his family, was killed in front of him. And he also was a soldier and all of his friends were killed in front of, this like thing where you're like, oh my God, like how much could this one poor, Genasi go through? Like,
I'm bringing enough trauma to my tabletop RPG character because of what I'm bringing to it. I don't need to add on extra stuff. Like, I got it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the mechanics of Wander Home are super interesting. I think about the veteran all the time, how the mechanic is that, like, if you kill someone or if you hurt someone, then like you are not allowed to play the character ever again. Like, they will exist as an NPC, but they cannot be your character anymore. And I'm like, that's so smart in order to actually look at violence. If you're actually going to play violence, it's like, well, if someone's violent, they don't get to be a part of your community anymore. And I think that's like such an interesting way to deal with it.
Yeah, if someone's violent, you're not going to invite them along on your gentle adventure. You're going to be like, bye.
Yeah,
you're kicked out of our little wagon train.
It's like, we were going to go harvest lily pads, but you don't get to come anymore. Exactly.
Yeah, and someone brought a longbow, and I don't think that was necessary.
So we don't need a longbow. We're just get the lily pads are right there.
Yeah. So there's that in terms of like tabletop games that I think are really good for unwinding. Mm-hmm. There are so many video games that I think do that same thing, where it's a comforting, cozy game, Animal Crossing, whatever, but for adults.
Yes.
There are so many games like that are made for, like Spiritfarer, for example, is one of my favorite games of all time. I played that last year when I was finishing my dissertation, which is an incredibly stressful time. And my grandfather, who had Alzheimer's, was dying, basically, which is what that game is about. Yeah. And it was like the best possible game in the world to be playing when you're like spending all day reading about horrifying things and writing about them, and then being like, I need to go back and edit my sentences to make sure that this sounds good. And that I properly describe the murders this lady was carrying out.
Sure.
And then you're like thinking about a loved one going through something. And that game was just like the game for it. Like, it's perfect.
I think that you've exposed two types of game interactions that are healthy, and each of them are equal. Like, one is I'm going to look at this in the face and I'm going to give it a proper reaction, whether it's going to be catharsis or laughter or or trying to understand it or digest it. And then the other hand is like, I'm going to run away from it actively. I don't want to think about this. I feel like so much of our current society, or of working society, is like, there's something you need to keep in your head, but don't think about it, but also you can't address it. Right. The thing, I mean, just because we're talking about like Nazis, I was watching The Crown, and the whole thing with Wallace Simpson that was happening with the former king of England. The Jasper is going to hate me because I'm talking about British history on an episode he's not on. But just like the fact that like they actively knew she was a Nazi sympathizer / activist, I guess is the best way to say it. And then it's like and no one was allowed to think about it, but also they like shunned, but they were thinking about it because they shunned the king who loved her, and then he had to step down. But it's just like, so much of our life is like keeping bad thoughts in our head and then neither addressing them nor leaving them alone. And through play, we actually have that choice. And I find that like really, for someone who has to deal with it as explicitly as you do, you are like making active choices in your life about how are the games going to help me or not help me.
Absolutely. I mean, I think if you do any job, whether you're a historian or, people who do jobs that are more directly dealing with trauma, like therapists or doctors, or people who like are looking in the face, care workers, at any moment in time, at some point, self-care, and not in the sort of modern way that people talk about it, where they're like, I take a bath and I light a candle.
Yeah.
Like,
I walked for 15 minutes and I'm fine.
Yeah, self-care really in the truest sense of like making sure I'm all good and can like exist in the world and can incorporate the things I interact with on a daily basis into my understanding of myself and the world, and not go absolutely insane.
Right.
Is like, I like very actively choose the media that I consume, the games that I play, the, shows I watch, the things I listen to, because otherwise my whole life would just be about scary, violent things. Like, I don't ever consume true crime anymore. I used to like true crime, and now I have zero interest in it whatsoever, because it just was like, what am I doing? I can't be reading about Nazis, writing about Nazis, thinking about murder, talking to families of people who were killed by Nazis, and then listen to a story about how my boyfriend is probably going to murder me and put me in a suitcase. Like, I can't do that.
Yeah.
You have to preserve a self that is like whole, and that can't exist if your whole life isn't carefully, not like curated, but isn't created with a sort of intention behind it.
Right. Well, there's so much out of our hands as people living in 2023, like in terms of capitalism and like the planet and our jobs and the way that our family works, just at all. And the way that we can take control of it is through media consumption. You're absolutely right. Even if we're going to make the streamers have all of the things on there that we need, and if not, we're going to go download it from the internet, because we should consume and play the way that we want to, as so much else is out of our control. And I think that's good. I think that's fair. Let's have some control over our lives, at least during using the games we play.
Absolutely. I mean, if nothing else, like, you can choose what things you put in your ears and your eyeballs. Like, you can choose that, and what comes out of your mouth and who you're hanging out with. Like, you can choose that. So you might as well choose one that like helps you preserve that whole, happy, thriving self.
Right.
Yeah.
And don't feel like you have to put anything in your tabletop RPG game and talk to your players and make sure that's what they want. That's what more I'm trying to get at is like, I felt like I had to explore dark themes or like the things that make me feel bad or traumatic, especially, as so much of the world changed in 2020. But I'm like, you know what if I don't? What if I don't have to do all of those things? I'm just going to do a different thing, something that's going to feel satisfying anyway, that isn't like needing to make up a fantasy slur. Like, I don't need to do that in my game. It's just going to cause me more pain. It's just not going to be as effective as I want it to be, so I'm not going to do it.
And there are people who I think do this very well. And I know that we mentioned him earlier and he shows up in every friggin' RPG podcast ever, but Brendan Lee Mulligan does a very good job of talking about dark things or exploring difficult themes without making it traumatic, genuinely. He can talk about things that are difficult, loss, sexuality, gender, all of these things that people really struggle with, but he doesn't make it feel like, well, that was a downer, on to the next episode,
Right. Yeah. For sure. Well, hey, can I ask you an advice question that isn't Nazi related at all?
Please.
Is that okay with you?
Yeah, please do.
Well, I mean, we already touched on this a little bit, but I thought this question was particularly helpful. This is from Rage Against Everyone Else's Machine. I give them funny advice names sometimes. He, him. What are games that could help me calm down, like a very peaceful game that doesn't make you rage? I think that people don't know that there are cozy and nice games for adults out there. And I think Wander Home is really good if you want to do that other type of tabletop RPG game. I think that playing goofy one-shot tabletop RPGs, Grant Howitt is a really good example because, he makes the weirdest and wildest and nastiest tabletop RPGs that are direct critiques of capitalism. I think that he's working on a game where you fight Nazi vampires and that's a whole thing, or you're vampires who fight Nazis. I can't remember. It's he's so explicit about that on its face with games like Spire and then that one that I can't remember. But at the same time, he's also making these one-page RPGs where everyone are seagulls, or you play as goats, or you play as sexy battle wizards. I think playing goofy stuff or giving permission to be goofy and silly is a way to leave your adult problems at the door as something people think that fun and silliness and goofiness is childish. If only I think that the relationship comes from the last time we were allowed to be silly and goofy was when we were children, right? But I think that, just doing dumb shit and having a game totally go off the rails within 15 minutes and being okay with that, I think that might be another place to start instead of having to, there should be enough in your life that you can play a crunchy game or a dark game and also a silly and super light one at the same time.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think Grant Howitt is a good example. We were talking before the show started about a one-shot that my friends and I played called Big Gay Orcs, which is by him. And that is a great example because actually in these games, you can still deal with difficult themes a little bit. In that one, I think you're supposed to be denying your love for your comrade or whatever in it, for your fellow orc soldier. And, you lose the game if either die or give in to your baser desires and confess your love to your
of course
fellow soldier.
Of course, the honey heist game mechanic of you become too much of a bear or too much of a thief, and then your whole life is thrown into disarray.
And there are also people who make one-shots and even longer campaigns. There's one creator named RNW who makes quests and one-shots that you can play that are very, very fun, but also still cute and kind of silly. And so they're a good sort of breath of fresh air or kind of comic relief, especially if you've been playing games that are heavy or really ragey or stressful. She has one called the Fae Fair, which is where you're at a Fae carnival. There's one called the Tremor
cute.
Train, which is a spooky train railroad thing. And also all of these have really cute, colorful, printable things that you can use. There's one called the Coven of Cats. I think you're witch cats.
Of course.
In it. I haven't played that one, but some of them are actual campaigns as well. If you want a few weeks off from whatever else you're doing, but they're designed for adults. They're not just I suppose kids could play them if they wanted to, but like
kids don't need to be cat witches. They're fine. They're dealing.
They've got enough going on.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I like a lot of games like that. And there are plenty of video games that I think fit into that sort of category of like fun and nice, but not necessarily for children. Spiritfarer, which we were just talking about, is a good example of that, which will like hit you in the heart, but not make you want to punch anything.
Yeah. Do you have any other recommendations?
Unpacking is good.
Oh God, unpacking is so emotional. Another emotional one. It's nice, but it's emotional for sure.
If you haven't played this, I don't know where you've been, but Stardew Valley is great for that because there's lots of weird stuff going on in that game beyond just the like normal, you've got a farm. It's also like, there's the witch and here's your insane quest to basically the underworld. And here's your, you can gamble now.
Here are the Junimos. They're forest spirits. They'll rebuild your rec center. Whenever I check in with Amanda of what's happening in Stardew Valley, I'm like, why is this in this game? Bored Ape apparently is working on a new update with some other stuff with it. So it's still being updated. There's still new stuff in Stardew Valley that's coming. And then his like chocolatier game is going to come out, like some spooky chocolatier game is going to come out. Yeah, I continue to get on the Stardew Valley train, of course.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. I also think for games that are fun but not enraging necessarily are if you get a good roguelike game, like a good one where you die, but the dying, for example, Hades, where you die, but the dying is part of it, not in the sense of like, I've died and I have to start all over again. You're like, I've died, but now I've learned and I can do this thing better, and not in an infuriating way like Elden Ring, just in a way where it's like the dying actually makes you better, not angrier.
I think that there are a lot of different roguelikes to play now because it's become another like interesting artistic mode. So there is going to be a roguelike for you, whether you like deck builders or you like twin stick shooters or you like, I don't know, there's every single type of roguelike exists. I love Peglin, which is a Peggle roguelike that exists where you play as a little goblin guy and you play Peggle to do it. So that's also, it's just endlessly replayable.
I was a Peggle freak in high school.
Go buy Peglin. Go buy it. It's like still in early access. It's like $10 on Steam. It's really, really
amazing.
Fun. Yeah. Wonderful. Claire, thank you so much for being here. I like that we laughed our way through your field of study and figured out how it applied to games. Hey, where can people find you?
Mostly on Twitter at CEAUBIN or CE Aubin. That is probably the best place to find me. I also have the same name on Blue Sky. If Twitter goes down, I feel like now I need to add that disclaimer in. But yeah, those are probably the two best places to catch me.
Claire is a very, very good Twitter follow. I think probably the best Twitter follow I've had in the last 2-3 years. 100%.
Wow, that's so nice.
Yeah.
But you do have to see all the people who like really get mad at me on Twitter. So I appreciate you for being willing to sort of withstand that.
You've been forged in fire. It's like you and Menswear Guy are like the Twitter, modern Twitter has happened to you and you came out the other side. Remember, folks, you can still get tickets to our live show in Manchester, the United Kingdom. It's going to be the first time that I've been to the United Kingdom, first time I've performed outside of the United States. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to bother Jasper in person. It's going to be sick. Do you want to come to Manchester?
I have been to Manchester. I love Manchester.
Yeah,
Jasper
clear. Lives out there too, which is why we're excited to do that over there. So the tickets, August 19th is a Saturday, 7:30 British summertime. Go hang out. We'll be around and I'll be Manchestering it up with Amanda and Jasper and a special guest. It's going to be wonderful. You can also follow me on TikTok. I'm having a lot of fun on TikTok. I've been doing like tabletop RPG stuff on there. So if you want more of this, go follow me on TikTok at Eric the Silver. I'm trying to convince another platform that I'm the best DM in podcasting because I am, and everyone should know. But yeah, again, Claire, thank you so much for coming on. And remember, there's nothing in the manual about having feelings. Games and Feelings is produced by Eric Silver and edited and mixed by Misha Stanley. The theme music is Return to French Toast Castle by Jeff Bryce, and the art was created by Jessica Boyd. Find transcripts for this episode and all episodes at our website, gamesandfeelings.com. Until next time, press X to enjoy the podcast.